So in this tutorial, we'll be continuing with the cutoff versus button 2-bet pots, looking at the 5-span high boards, and we'll focus a little bit more on the turn play after a flop by the button. So notice on this from the previous tutorial, we talked about how these 5-span high boards were being checked at a fairly high frequency for the cutoff, just because of the number of high card type hands which would have missed this board in comparison to the button's range. So we'll have a look at some of the turn play on some of these boards. We'll first look at the continuation on the turn after a small bet by the button. Let's have a look at this Queen 6-4. So on this Queen 6-4, equity is not doing so well for the cutoff. Cutoff checks most of their range, and here because the button has a substantial range advantage and the cutoff's got a lot of fairly weak hands, the button is continuation betting, not continuation betting. The button is going to be betting into the cutoff at almost a 70% frequency, and all the hands are being bet with sort of sets and top pair being bet slightly more frequently. Say for example here, looking at the top pair on average, with the average betting frequency for the entire range of 69.5%, the top pair is betting slightly more than that, 73.2%, the sets at 90%. These pocket pairs between the 6 and the queen are being checked back a little bit more, that the middle pairs being bet a little bit more, and then these lower pairs counterintuitively betting slightly more often, and they're bluffing. These lower pairs benefit a bit more from betting at a slightly higher frequency to deny equity from the cutoff's overcard hands. These ace highs checking back slightly more than the average betting frequency, and then these fairly weak hands bluffing at roughly the same frequency as the rest of the range. So after this small bet, the cutoff raises at a pretty high clip. All of these other pairs that the cutoff was using to protect the range has now decided to raise. The other pairs being the aces and kings mainly. There's aces and kings alongside stuff like strong queen X, ace queen also being ace queen offsuit, and ace queen suited being the strongest queen X in the cutoff's range, and there's also king queen suited and queen jack suited with the backdoor flush draw betting at a reasonably high frequency as well. And of course the sets, particularly the set of 6s and the set of 4s, are going to be raising the flop all the time. But the set of queens, on the other hand, usually is going to, at a pretty high frequency, is just going to call and then raise it later straight, or be used to protect the remaining queen X in the range, which the cutoff on this bot has got a lot of queen X, and that queen X has usually got a weaker kicker than the button's queen X from pre-flop. So let's have a look at the bet call line and see how the turns play out. So obviously on a 6 or a 4, there's going to be a fair amount of donking for the cutoff, because on a 6 and a 4, the cutoff has suddenly made a lot of trips with their one pair hands. The cutoff calls a lot of these 4x and 6x hands on the flop, basically never folding any of them. And so on a 6 or a 4, that brings a lot of trips to the cutoff's range and also reduces the number of sets in the button's range. Very good cards for the cutoff, and the cutoff will start to have a donk bet. So we're going to have a look at them quickly. So say for example on the 6 of hearts, you've got this donk bet at a quarter pot. The equity for the cutoff's gone up to 54.32. A fair amount of trips and much fewer sets. Here obviously quads and full houses. And so trips or better is only about 7% of the range here for the button. But trips or better here is also about 7% of the range. So the ranges have got a lot closer together, except now the remaining hands in the cutoff's range is more heavily weighted in top pair because of those overcards folded on the flop. And then the continuation bet size for the button is actually going to be a mixture of either quite large for the boats and the trips and strong top pairs, or fairly small for those weaker pocket pairs looking to deny equity on the turn. Okay, let's have a look at a different turn card. Relative break, potentially 9 of clubs, which brings a backdoor flush draw. Cutoff checking the entire range, and now the button is betting quite big, either this pot size bet at around 27% of the time, and then this twice pot bet at about 18% of the time. And then the value range for each of these is going to be top pair, and well, this strong top pair is the value range, and for the other bet size, yeah, also strong top pair or better, but much more set heavy in the bigger size. Another turn card, let's say for example the 8 of spades, which completes the 7-5 straight. Checking, once again you've got some fairly big betting for the button. 7-5 straight is not a huge consideration because 7-5 is only 4 combinations pre-flop at most, and here it represents only 0.86% of the range because a lot of 7-5 would have raised the flop as that semi-bluff, as that draw bluff. Okay, so here Say, for example, you get a pot size bet or a twice pot size bet, but let's look at this pot size bet. And then on the river, let's say the river is a two of hearts, very brick card, checking, and now making this river twice pot bet with the set, and sometimes jamming, of course. So there's probably a bet size in between there that will work pretty well, but this twice pot bet's being used a lot of the time. Obviously, if you bet too big, so you just jam all in, sometimes you end up running into a set or a stronger set, not getting quite as much value. So there will be some optimal bet size in between this twice pot bet and the all in. And if you just overbet the turn and get called, you're just jamming the river, right? This river jam is only about 1.5-ish, 1.6, 1.8 times the pot, something like that. Pot size on the turn, jamming the pot for about 3 times the pot. A little over 3 times the pot is the jam there. So you can see how the pot grows quite quickly when you put in an overbet on the turn. So you don't actually have to really be overbetting these kinds of flops in order to grow the pot very quickly. Although you do, as we'll look at next, get more value by overbetting the flop into a condensed range. Here the cutoff range on the flop is actually fairly polar compared to the buttons range, in the terms that they've got sets and over pairs, but a lot of air. So a lot of air and weak pairs and weak ace highs. So that's why this small bet works pretty well to just deny equity from all those ends. So let's have a look at a different one. Ace 8-6, looking at almost the complete opposite kind of board. Even though these boards are both 5-span high, Ace 8-6 is got a very different strategy for the button here. We've got a 1.5 pot bet happening, and then the value range for this 1.5 pot bet on the flop is mostly sets, and then the very strongest top pairs. So there's a bit of a theme when you're making the overbet at some stage in the tree. You're representing sets and strong top pairs, and then at a later stage you're probably just going to be checking back the strong top pairs potentially on the river or all the turn, and then the sets just go for the full 3 streets of value. So let's have a look at this overbet line on the flop. Overbetting here for 1.5 times a pot. Sign of faults on the top pairs in the cutoff's range, floating out of position with some of these indifferent hands like the pocket kings, queens, jacks, tens, trying to draw to a set. And then these under pairs just letting it go. So say, for example, we see a brick turn. Actually, we'll look at the turn report first just to see which cards are being donked. And like a lot of different cards are being donked, in particular this king, this 8 and this 9. Let's have a look at the king. Did we look at the king in the last one? Here the king brings a lot of ace king for the cutoff, and doesn't really mean that there's going to be too many bluffs that actually improve here, because the bluffing range on the flop was mainly these under pairs and these pocket pairs and one pair type hands being used as a bluff. This king queen is really being checked back to try and draw to a pair, because there's not a lot of benefit in turning these kinds of hands into a bluff, because you're really just losing your pair draw value because you run yourself into an ace so often after you overbet the flop. So the king is pretty good for the cutoff here. It improves pocket kings and ace king and doesn't really improve any hands for the button. That's why this is a bit of a donk line, and donking into a polar range just means you're going to get raised a lot. These under pairs have to let it go. These under pairs were bluffing on the flop, and now they're letting it go now. Here on the turn, checking, and then there's still a pot size bet into the fairly condensed range. So obviously the betting range is slightly stronger than the checking range. Checking range is much more top pair, and then the betting range is more 2-pair and set heavy. Definitely more 2-pair heavy with the ace king, and there's still a fair amount of sets, set 8s instead of 6s in the checking range to defend that 6x rank and 8x rank, 8x pairs and 6x pairs from this pot size bet here. And notice against this pot size bet, like a lot of the top pairs are folding, but many of the weaker pairs, and I mean all these 6x's are folding, but this 8x with a flush draw are all continuing, and this 8x without any backdoor blockers are continuing. This sort of like 10-8 of hearts is continuing on with the 10-8 of clubs, because the 10-8 of hearts doesn't really block anything. Okay, let's have a look at a brick turn. It's not really a brick it's a brick for the cutoff, but not necessarily a brick for the button, because now the button actually improves some of the bluffs on the flop. The bluffs on the flop was actually the pocket pairs, so when these low pocket pairs hit, the button has actually improved some of the range. Here, the button gets an extra few combinations of value by improving to this set and betting this pot size bet on the turn. If we change it up a bit, 3 of clubs, same kind of deal. All the flush draws are continuing, with the exception of these flush draws without any kind of pair value. Really, against an overbet on the flop and then a pot size bet on the turn, your flush draws that want to continue need some sort of pair value there. So pot size bet on the turn, and then say, for example, if the river has bottom card, sure, you don't have as much value anymore, but the range is so polar that doesn't make too much sense to donk. Is there a donk size going to be very small just to prevent these very weakest hands from facing the dreaded check back with a bluff on the turn. Check, river jam, calling off with obviously trips and our top pairs, but the river jamming range is, I'm saying I've got a boat. When you're saying if you've got a boat in this line, you're folding top pair, at least you should be a lot of the time. The last example, just maybe one that's a little bit in the middle. Yeah, let's look at the Queen 10-2 is slightly better for the cutoff because of the two Broadway cards, brings a lot of pairs to the cutoff's range. Remember that the cutoff's got a lot of like these Broadway hands pre-flop, these offset Broadway hands pre-flop. So on a Queen and a 10, they flop a lot of one pair hands. And there's many more straight draws on the Queen 10 because of the Broadway draw. So checking. Now we are facing a pot size bet here. Pot size bet, value range, a set of 2s, a little bit of a set of 10s, Queen 10 for value. And then it's basically ace queen and king queen is the value component of the range. So making that pot size bet, call, look at some different turns, look at the low checking frequency. So lower checking frequency, 9 of spades, ace of spades, jack of spades, 10 of spades, right? These cards where there's a low checking frequency for the cutoff have completed a straight draw or have paired the board in terms of pairing the 10, pairing the queen, sometimes pairing the 2, or completing the flush. You've got some donks on the flush as well. So I guess we can looking at the 9 of spades won't really be super interesting because it's just range donking the turn just because this 9 of spades is so good for the cutoff. The cutoff basically has completed all their flushes and all their straights simultaneously, and they've called a lot of them on the flop against this pot size bet because against the pot size bet you've got the odds, all those straights here, all the straights to king jack has improved, all the flushes, all the flush draws, which there are a lot of on this board, a lot of king x flush draws and ace x flush draws have improved. So yeah, the 9 of spades really just drills it for the cutoff, and so the cutoff really has to be donking here because the range is just so good and you really want to prevent your opponent from checking back. Look at the check back frequency, 63%, the bet size is actually really small, so really just when the turn card like this drills your range, just smashes your range, you really need to start leading. You shouldn't be checking too much. Similarly, on the ace of spades to a slightly lesser degree, but because there's a little bit less ace x, although all this ace x of spades here, it ends up being blocked when the turn ace of spades comes, but there's still plenty of straights and flushes that complete. The king jack completes, the flushes complete, and then the bet size is slightly bigger for this turn donk for the cutoff. Checking, and then there's a check back range of 55.5%, and the bet size is very small, but here the cutoff leads and starts betting big and is saying, I've outdrawn your set, mate, so I'm just gonna plot it into you, is really what's happening there. Other interesting turn cards, just as like an offsuit 9 is going to do the same kind of thing. Offsuit 9 pulling the king jack, and there's a lot of king jack. All the king jack offsuit will open pre-flop and then call this pot size bet. So when the king jack just smashes it like that, then you just really need to start leading because you've just outdrawn the set with a big chunk of your range. Board pairing card, say for example, Queen of Diamonds. Board pairing card as well, reduces the amount of value range, reduces the amount of value hands in the buttons range from the flop value betting component. The queen being revealed suddenly reveals the fact that the buttons range is more bluff heavy, and so the button should be checking back a lot. Because the button should be checking back a lot on this turn, the cutoff needs to start leading small with some of the value to deny those checkbacks with those bluffs on the flop, right? There's no way on the flop that the button could have known that the Queen of Diamonds was coming on the turn, and they're much more likely because this Queen of Diamonds has come up on the turn, the button is much more likely to have a bluff on the flop, and so the cutoff needs to lead a small size to deny the checkbacks from these hands here. 60% checkback frequency. A lot of those checkbacks are these weak under pairs trying to draw to a set by checking back, drawing to their 2 outs. And you should be trying to deny that by betting small on the turn here. If there was a smaller turn donk size, maybe that would be used. Donk size is smaller than 25%, and I commonly, when facing a big bet like this, will use even smaller donk sizes than 25% in my own game. Just because this is the simulation, it tells you gives you some hints about what you can do, but you don't actually have to do everything that the sim says. You can change things up, run your own turn, no locks, etc., to figure out exactly what's going on and improve your own game. And let's have a look at a brick. Four of hearts. Brick, value range, top pair or better, holding the turn. Save down for another brick on the river. 8 of diamonds is a little bit bricky, not too many straights here. Jack 9 is the only straight. There's no Jack 9 offsuit from pre-flop. And then the 2 pair plus jams the river. and all the top pairs will check back. Some of the ace queen can jam the river. Ace queen should be indifferent here. So it's a 7. But what is a 7 doing? Really just this over pairs is pairing up with his king jack to try and get some folds from ace highs, which would otherwise check back. But it's the same kind of deal. 2-pair jamming, sets jamming, top pair ace queen, sometimes jamming, right? So that's how you play it. So be wary of these kinds of boards. This flush draw board with the 2 Broadway cards, very easy for the turn to significantly change the board and the cutoff needs to start donking. And so that's where there's a pot size bet on the flop, trying to deny a bit of equity from those strong draws. Those strong draws will get there sometimes. So for example, against this pot size bet here on the turn, against 2 pot size bets, like these flush draws now actually have to fold. And I don't actually really folding a flush draw on a brick, but in this particular formation, pre-flop, the button's only bluffs that they could actually, the hands the button is actually bluffing with are these pocket pairs, right? So these pocket pairs are being bluffed, right? So if you're calling with a weak flush draw here on the turn against a second pot size bet, and then the flush misses, you just end up checking and then losing to a pocket pair, which checks back on the river. Say, for example, call here, like check, and then checks back with the pocket threes, right? And what does pocket threes win against? Pocket threes win against a 6-5, which was a flush draw and a gut shot on the turn. So that kind of makes sense as a call. The 9-8, Jack 8, Jack 9, like all these hands just check and then lose to the pocket fives, pocket threes. So that's why you really have to be quite cautious when calling a flush draw here in the turn against this big bet, because the button just doesn't have any hands that are weaker than yours at showdown, right? They're bluffing with pocket pairs. So when you're bluffing with pocket pairs, it really is important to continue with showdown hands over flush draws, right? So that's why a lot of these second pairs are calling, because these second pairs are currently ahead of the pocket pairs in the button's range. All right, I think we'll leave it there. So that's a little bit of the turn play after the button bets a flop on these kinds of boards. So yeah, definitely think about how you're playing the flop, and then the turn play is going to be a little bit easier, and then you got to watch out for the turns which significantly change the boards. If it goes brick, then you can often just go bet with 2-bet plus as the button here and do quite well for yourself. But if the turn of the river significantly changes in terms of the run out, you should be fairly cautious, and then the cutoff should start leading at some stage. All right, so in the next tutorial, we'll be looking at the 5-span low. We'll be looking at the flop strategy for the 5-span low. So there's going to be more overcards and some slightly more straight draws on the 5-span low than on the 4-span low. So we'll have a look at how those straight draws interact with the board and the ranges, and how the flops will play out. So thanks for watching this video, guys, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.